What was the nature of that conversation?
Basically, it was almost like the game of telephone where I would tell him what Miss Montgomery said to Cindy. Cindy told me what Miss Montgomery said, and I would get a response from Mr. Bradsher, well, that's not what Miss Montgomery told me, or that I'll see her at church on Sunday and speak to her about it. But the original conversation that he would assist that took place at Elizabeth's Pizza back in January was with the understanding that the Person Community College semester was to start in September, I believe. So we knew, starting late July, early August, that that deadline was coming to the wire. If Cindy was going to take that class at Person Community, it needed to be registered and happen, and it wasn't.
Okay.
And there just seemed to be one excuse after the other as to, I'll speak with her, that's not what she told me. I don't know why Cindy's being told something different than Miss Montgomery was telling Mr. Bradsher.
Okay, and at some point did you and the defendant have to have a discussion about your wife having to attend another nursing school or program?
Well, at some point, we knew Person Community wasn't going to be an option, so Cindy started looking at other schools and wound up getting accepted to South University.
Do you know when that was around?
I think it was October 15, but I'm not for sure.
Okay. Now, were there some requirements that she was going to have to take some classes to get into this other nursing program?
Yes?
And were those online classes?
Yes, sir. Some were online, some were physical classes.
Okay. Did you have any interaction or any, or I should say, did your office have any involvement in her taking classes?
I had asked two assistants, well, I asked one legal assistant and one assistant DA if they would assist Cindy with her classes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, once Person Community was not going to happen, it basically was almost 8 months in the toilet wasted. And South had their own deadlines, and there was so much workload to be done for Cindy to get in on schedule that, and some of the classes were just, it was just a manpower issue. So I asked if they would assist her with some, I think it was a math class, and I was wrong to ask them.
Okay. When you say you were wrong to ask, what do you mean by that?
I felt like I was asking them as a friend, but I never thought that it would come across as, hey, you're an at-will employee and I'm telling you or asking you as your supervisor, as your boss. I realized there really wasn't much room for them to say no if they objected to it.
Okay. Do you realize that, well, when were you asking them to assist her with these classes? Was this during work or was this after work?
No, it was during work.
Okay. And do you see anything wrong with that?
Then I didn't. Now, of course, I do.
Okay. But it happened, and they actually did assist and at least took a test or something. Is that right? What?
I'm not sure the level of assistance they provided. I know one of the classes wasn't even at South, but they did assist.
Okay. And you mentioned now this car ride to Ocracoke.
Yes, sir.
What was the reason to go to Ocracoke Island here in North Carolina?
Twice a year, the Conference of District Attorneys has a function, and the elected DAs across the state come together collectively as a group to attempt to set up lobbying policies and exchange some ideas, so to speak, and get some CLE credits, continuing legal education credits.
Okay.
And the state puts that on.
And so then, do you know how many elected DAs there are?
I think there were 44.
Okay, so then presumably all 44 or a big chunk of them would attend those meetings when they could?
It would vary. I went to just one because I was in training. I was in trial the first one and in training the two other ones. So the one, Ocracoke, was the only one I went to.
When you were going to Ocracoke, was there a plan on who you were going to go there with and where you would stay?
Yes.
What was that?
Mr. Bradsher, the Alamance County DA, Pat Nadolsky, and myself were going to rent a house at Ocracoke.
Okay, and how were you going to get to Ocracoke Island?
I was going to drive from my house to Mr. Bradsher's residence in Person County, and he was going to drive us to Ocracoke.
And was this the first week of April of 2016?
16. Yes, sir.
Okay. And the first week of April in 2016, did you drive to the defendant's house in Person County?
I did.
And before you went on that trip, did you and your wife have a discussion about her wanting you to do something there?
We did.
What was your understanding of that discussion?
When a couple weeks before the Ocracoke trip, as we discussed earlier, when Mr. Bradsher and some of his staff came and took the Shockley case, that was the only work that Cindy had. And up until that point, there had been no communication between her and Mr. Bradsher or Mr. Stoltz and Mr. Bradsher as to what she was to work on or to be doing. So when I was in Ocracoke, before we went for Ocracoke, I told my wife that I would ask Mr. Bradsher once about it because I was not getting involved pursuant to this ethics opinion. So I asked Mr. Bradsher in his driveway, Cindy has no work because you took the Shockley case and no one is calling her back as to what to do. And his response was to just have her concentrate on school and he'd get back with her.
Okay. And what was your reaction from that?
And then bring it up again.
And this happened in his driveway at his house?
Correct.
Or in the car?
In the car, in the driveway.
Okay. So then you go to Ocracoke Island.
Yes, sir.
When you return, do you communicate that conversation with your wife?
I did.
What'd you tell her?
I probably told her before I got back, to be quite honest with you. I'm sure we spoke. And I told her that I mentioned it to him. And that was going to be my involvement.
What did you tell him? Did you tell her what he had told you?
I'm sure I did.
Okay. And are you aware if after that point or after that conversation, if your wife was ever given any other work to do by Mr. Bradsher or Mr. Stoltz or anyone in Mr. Bradsher's employ?
I am aware, and the answer is no.
And did you ever bring this issue up with Wallace Bradsher again? Did you ever bring it up with him again?
October of 16.
Okay. Between this April of 16 and October of 16, what is your wife doing, if you're aware?
Going to nursing school.
Okay. Are you aware if your wife was still being paid by the state of North Carolina while she was attending nursing school?
He was.
And are you aware if there was any reduction in salary or benefits to her during that period of time?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, your wife was an hourly employee, if you're aware?
I believe so.
Okay. Are you aware if your wife had other benefits through the state of North Carolina as a condition of her employment?
She did.
What kinds of benefits would those have been?
Health, retirement. I guess she would accrue vacation or sick time.
Okay. And are you aware if during this period of time that we're talking about from April until this next conversation, I think you said October, are you aware if your wife is still putting in hours as if she were working?
As far as I knew.
Okay. Did you and your wife ever have a discussion during that period of time about what was going on?
Every now and then, I would ask if she heard anything, if she's been given any assignment to do. And the answer,
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor. I'd like to cross-examine Ms. Blitzer.
If you would refrain from saying what what someone else told you, but if you could, you certainly testify from your own personal knowledge about what you observed.
You would ask her randomly throughout that period of time, I think is what your testimony was, if she had heard anything or gotten any other work?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, had she received any information or communication from Mr. Bradsher or his office assigning her any other tasks?
She had not.
And this may seem odd or a silly question, but if your wife is attending nursing school at this period of time, correct?
Yes, sir.
How is she going to do this work if she was assigned work?
After school, late in the evenings and the weekends.
Okay.
There was time to do it. There just was nothing to do.
Okay. And are you aware if your wife made any efforts to reach out to the defendant or John Schultz or anyone else within Mr. Bradsher's prosecutorial district to request work?
She did.
And are you aware if you had instructed her to do that?
I didn't tell her to reach out. She would reach out on her own.
Okay. But you're aware that she did in fact reach out?
Yes, sir.
Okay. During that period of time, did you and, if you recall, did you and Mr. Bradsher have any other interactions personally?
I know we spoke briefly when the lawsuit was filed, March of 16. We had some conversations about me attending the BLET program at Rockingham Community College. Just some very mundane information. I know we spoke about when they came and took the Shockley case sometime either that day or shortly thereafter, they indicated to me they were planning on, or Mr. Bradsher indicated they were going to try it November of 16, and it did actually appear on a Rockingham County trial calendar, if I'm not mistaken, but it wound up being a plea.
You're talking about the Shockley case?
Yes, sir.
Now, at some point, at this point, Tyler Henderson's working for you or employed by you, correct?
Yes, sir.
During that period of time, do you ever see Tyler Henderson?
I saw him the first or second week of August 2016.
Okay. And from the time that you hired him until the time that you saw him in 2016 in the first or second week or so of August, had you ever assigned Tyler Henderson any tasks to do for your office?
No, sir.
Had anyone at your direction or in your understanding in your office assigned him any tasks to do from within your office?
No one had.
Okay. Was your understanding about Tyler Henderson's employment, were you was there any plan between you and Wallace Bradsher during the employment of him to share information or anything like that through Tyler Henderson or your wife?
No, sir.
When you saw Tyler Henderson again in August of 2016, what was the nature of that?
I was at Rockingham Community College in the BLET program, and he was texting my administrative assistant looking for me for a purported meeting we had scheduled, which we did not have a meeting scheduled.
Okay. And when you say BLET, what is BLET?
It's a 12-week basic law enforcement training program that most community colleges offer.
Okay, and
I had enrolled in it as the DA.
okay, and why would you have done that?
Well, there were many reasons. There were, number one, significant shortcomings that I saw in my county with discovery procedures and interview procedures, where officers just weren't being taught correctly. So I thought that was a real good way to see what they were being taught, number one. It was also a very heightened point in our society with officer-involved shootings. I had already, in my short tenure, been involved with one officer-involved shooting where that person died. I wanted to get some insight into that. And candidly, in a rural county, it was very good politically. I discussed it with many DAs, Mr. Bradsher included. They thought it was a great idea. The director of the college thought it was a great idea.
Now, while you're doing this BLET course, that takes time during the day, correct?
Yes, it was Monday through Friday, 8 to 5.
Well, if you're doing this Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, how are you performing your duties as the district attorney?
The college in Rockingham is literally 3 blocks from the courthouse, so I had easy physical access. People had physical access to me. I had a phone, and I just organized my caseload to work around that. And I would go to my office sometimes after, but I was able to do my side of things while I was in that class.
Okay. Did Tyler Henderson ever get up with you while you were at this BLET course?
Yes, sir.
And what was the, if you know, what was the purpose of that?
He came to tell me at Mr. Bradsher's direction that the SBI had come to either to come to Person County's office or had come to conduct interviews at Person or Caswell about Miss Bradsher and Cindy.
And when you received that information from Tyler Henderson, what was the, well, one, what was his demeanor like when he's telling you this?
He was in panic mode.
Okay. And when you received that information, what did you do with it?
I'm sure I probably reached out to Mr. Bradsher by text or phone, but I don't know if I got him that minute. I saw Mr. Henderson over the lunch break during my BLET program, so I didn't have much time. I know at some point I'm sure I got up with Mr. Bradsher.
Okay. And from that period on, presumably now you at least know or have more suspicion that the SBI is looking into this wife situation or your wife and what she's doing as far as being paid and whether she's working or not, correct?
Correct.
And does that change you or your wife's behavior as far as her still entering in time and being paid for it?
No, it did not.
And why did you not change your behavior? If you know the SBI is looking into it, why don't you stop?
Well, when I spoke with Mr. Bradsher about it, the position that he articulated was that based on the letter from the Ethics Commission, which said that as the hiring authority, we had unfettered discretion with our employees. And if the decision was to give an employee time off for sick, for school, that was within our rights as the elected DAs.
Okay, do you realize now that that
Is ridiculous? Yes.
Okay. And in doing that, when do you have your next conversation with the defendant?
We didn't speak, it was not very, after the August conversation that I just talked about, I know that the media began reporting or printing about the SBI's activities with the judge in Hickory that was running it, so to speak. So it was shortly thereafter that we got counsel and limited my contact with Mr. Bradsher,
When you say you got counsel, what do you mean by that?
hired a lawyer.
Well, before you got counsel and hired a lawyer, did you and your wife ever make any efforts to get in touch with the defendant to resign your position?
That was the October conversation, not my position.
I'm sorry, your wife's position.
In October, yes, sir.
Okay. In October of 2016?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In October of 2016, how do you get up with the defendant?
We called Mr. Bradsher from our residence, my wife and I.
Can you describe, when you say we called, what do you mean by that?
I was on one extension, my wife was on the other extension of a wireless landline.
Okay, are you two in the same room while you're having this conversation?
No, because we were concerned about feedback from the handset, so she was in one room that has like a glass French door, and I was in the other room through,
Okay. Could you see each other?
yes.
During the course of that conversation, do you guys present the idea of resigning, or what happens during that conversation?
We discussed all the media reports, the atmosphere it was creating, what people were saying, quite frankly, and did he think it was better that Cindy resign and that Cindy was prepared to resign? And his response was unequivocally no, that ironically, that he would take it to a jury of 12. We've done nothing wrong. That's in his unfettered discretion to do with his employees as he wants. He's the hiring authority. And that we would just tell them that Cindy's working on all these cross-training and special projects that we had in Rockingham, and she would bring that information to Caswell Person and vice versa.
Now, were there any of these cross-training special projects to your knowledge?
They, not to my knowledge.
And when he said that, did you and your wife have a reaction?
We were in line of sight of one another through that glass door, and it's just like utterly flabbergasted that we're sitting here saying it's just becoming too much. This is not right. Should she resign? And Mr. Bradsher's telling her, no, not resign. This is the story we're going to go with. And I'm looking at Cindy and she's looking at me, and we're like, we're not going with that story because that story doesn't exist.
Okay. But you don't, Cindy doesn't resign then, though, does she?
No, he told her not to.
Okay. And does Cindy keep putting in time?
Yes,
Cindy keeps getting paid?
yes.
How long does that go on before she no longer gets paid?
I think it was shortly after that that somebody from Mr. Bradsher's office called and told Cindy that she was terminated.
Okay. And you said that you contacted an attorney.
Correct?
Was that before or after that phone call?
Before.
When you contacted the attorney, did you discuss Cindy's resignation with him?
In what way?
In that y'all were going to make this call to try and resign?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, did you, at this point, are you charged with anything by the SBI?
At this point, nobody is charged, and all the information being disclosed by the SBI and the judge were that the people of interest, so to speak, were Cindy and Jay Stoltz,
Okay.
not Mr. Bradsher, not myself, not Pam Bradsher, not Tyler Henderson.
Okay. At some point, that changes.
Correct.
And when you are doing all this, have you spoken to the SBI yet?
I did not speak to the SBI.
Okay.
Not at this point, no.
Okay. And did you talk to anybody in your office about this?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ask anyone in your office to not speak to the SBI?
Quite the opposite.
Tell me about that.
I got a call from Agent Whitley shortly after, I don't know, maybe a day or two after Tyler Henderson found me at the college. So Agent Whitley and I exchanged some voicemails. Then I realized that it was related to what Tyler Henderson came to see me about. So at that point, we got a lawyer involved, and I didn't speak with Agent Whitley till May of 17.
Why not?
That's what my lawyer said to do. It wasn't about me at that point. It was about Jay Stoltz and Cindy.
Okay. At some point, did you or your attorney on your behalf speak to your office?
Yes, when Agent Whitley communicated to my attorney that he wished to conduct interviews of my office staff. So to not create any undue influence like I had done with the classes, when we found this out, my attorney went, I arranged a staff meeting for my office to show up the next morning or something, maybe 2 days later, but I didn't show up. I wasn't even in the building. And Mr. Grace showed up.
That's your lawyer?
Correct. And he told my staff that Agent Whitley wanted to conduct interviews. They were free to speak or not speak. There was no repercussions if they did or didn't. And I was nowhere to be found. There was no pressure to do it or not to do it.
Okay. And at this point, are you a person of interest to your knowledge?
My knowledge, I'm not.
Okay. At some point that changes though, correct?
Correct.
And when does that change?
I think it changes around March of last year after the civil suit was filed.
And you talk about this civil suit, were you a party to a civil suit?
I was.
And what was in very general terms, what type of suit was that?
I guess a whistleblower suit.
Okay. And had you had any conversations with the defendant at any point about any quote unquote whistleblowers?
I did.
And what was the nature of your conversation with the defendant about whistleblowers?
Mr. Bradsher called me, it was January of 17, January of last year. He was very irate. Continued to tell me that as elected DAs, we have the right to undying loyalty, that our staff should do what we tell them to do. Somebody's leaking all this stuff to the press. There's got to be a mole in our offices. And he believed that it was Deborah Holbrook, and that's why he fired her. He also told me that he fired her because she couldn't convince the Caswell County Sheriff to adopt an electronic discovery policy, which I didn't believe then, I don't believe now. And he also told me that I should fire the mole in my office, but he got the wrong person.
What do you mean by he got the wrong person, and what did he tell you?
He told me that a trooper saw my chief assistant, Mark Keeney, in Phil Berger Sr.'s office.
Who's Phil Berger Sr.?
He's a lawyer in Rockingham County. His son was the DA who left that seat. That was the seat that I filled.
Okay. Is he a
So-
politically connected attorney?
He's a Senate pro tem.
Okay.
He is the politically connected attorney.
Okay. And so he told you that he saw Mr. Keeney, or that a trooper had seen, and we say trooper, you saying a state trooper?
Yes, sir.
A North Carolina highway patrolman had seen him, Mr. Keeney, in Mr. Berger's office?
Correct.
Okay. And what else came of that conversation?
That I also have the right to the undying loyalty as the elected DA, that I should fire Mark Keeney, but Mark Keeney wasn't the one in Senator Berger's office.
Did you fire Mark Keeney?
I did not.
Why not?
There was no reason to.
Okay. At some point, did you receive any other information about who the mole in your, quote unquote, mole in your office may be?
In that conversation?
In that conversation or any other conversation?
Well, a couple of days after that, I followed back up with Mr. Bradsher. I forget, quite frankly, if I called him or he called me. And at the second conversation, he told me, after he was adamant that I fire Mark Keeney, couple of days later, he told me, oh, that's the wrong person. If you fired him, you fired the wrong person. That it was another big, heavy-set guy in my office with blonde hair.
Do you have another larger, heavy-set man in your office with blonde hair?
I did.
Who was that?
Jason Ramey.
And later, did you come to find out if Jason Ramey had been the one that was actually speaking to people about this?
That's what I heard.
Okay. Did you fire Jason Ramey as a result of that?
No.
Why not?
Why would I?
Was there any other conversations between you and the defendant about whistleblowers or moles or anything like that that you remember?
Not specific conversations. I know he made a comment that if this went to trial, he would consider suing AOC for not training him properly. The ethics opinion letter that came back after he wrote, that seemed to be the real motivating force, empowering him and telling him, trying to empower me, that we were well within our rights to pay who we wanted to pay, whether they worked or not.
Okay. Eventually, as you said, the focus of the investigation kind of shifts off of necessarily Cindy and
Stoltz?
Mr. Stoltz. And I guess at that point it kind of comes to you, is that correct?
Yeah, it was pretty clear that the attention, so to speak, that the civil suit brought and the comments that those lawyers were making, as inaccurate as they were, about an alleged conspiracy between Mr. Bradsher and myself, that as the elected DAs, we were going to be the ones if charges came, and that Cindy, Miss Bradsher, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Stoltz would not be charged
Okay. And do you know why that would have been?
because we're the elected DAs, the hiring authority.
Okay. And at some point, did you come in and confess or give a statement to law enforcement or anyone else about your involvement in this scam?
I did.
And when did you do that?
May of 17,
And in May of 17, have you been criminally charged at that point yet?
I was not.
And when you came in and spoke, did you generally give the same information that you've given today?
I did.
Okay. And after that conversation, who did you talk to?
In May,
Mm-hmm.
Agent Whitley, and there were two other members of your office present.
Okay, not myself.
No, sir.
And when you had that discussion with Agent Whitley, after that occurred, were you eventually charged?
I was.
And did you eventually plead guilty to an offense?
I did.
Now, when you pled guilty to that offense, did you do anything else to try to mitigate your involvement or culpability in this?
I consented to a suspension of my license with the state bar.
When we say that, that's your law license?
Yes, sir.
So you consented to have your law license suspended. What else, if anything?
Well, that suspension was with the thought that this would be wrapped up quickly, and here we are a year later, and my license is still in state of suspension.
Okay.
I met with the lawyers in the civil suit and essentially told them what we discussed here today. That was part of my arrangement to cooperate with them and cooperate with you.
Okay. Did you pay any money back?
We did.
Okay. How much money did you pay back?
Paid back $48,000 and made no claim to any vacation, sick time, or retirement that had accrued.
Right.
That's Cindy had accrued.
Okay. When you say you paid that back, who did you pay that back to?
I wrote a check to my attorney's trust account, and I'm guessing he paid it back to AOC.
Okay. So to the state of North Carolina, you
Yes,
made
sir.
the restitution for the
Right.
monies that Cindy had accrued.
Correct.
If I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what I've marked as State's Exhibit number 3 for identification purposes. Will you take a look at that item, and after you've had a moment to look at it, if you'll tell me if you recognize it.
It's my transcript of plea.
When you say a transcript of plea, what's that mean?
It's a series of questions that the court asks the defendant to make sure that the plea is knowing, voluntary, and intelligent.
Okay, and this is a paperwork that you go through if you're gonna enter a guilty plea in Superior Court.
Correct.
Okay, and when you say this is your transcript of plea, is this the transcript that you filled out with your attorneys when you entered into that guilty plea?
Yes, sir.
And is it dated as when the guilty plea was entered?
Correct.
What's the date that you remember entering into that guilty plea?
July 17th, 17.
Does this appear to be a fair and accurate representation of your guilty plea
It does.
paperwork?
Yes, sir.
Okay, at this time, State would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 3.
No objection.
All right, it's allowed.
Now, in looking at State's Exhibit number 3, is there a section which lays out the entirety of your plea agreement?
There is.
And in looking at that, can you relay to the jury what your recollection and what that, or actually, can you look at the document and relay to the jury what the information contained in your guilty plea is?
It's just as we discussed that I pled guilty to one count of failing to discharge duties. I agree to fully cooperate with the pending investigation and prosecution arising out of this matter, any investigation by the North Carolina State Bar into this matter, and with the civil court process in the matter of Holbrook versus Bradsher et al. The state is declining further prosecution of the defendant or his wife for actions related to Ms. Blitzer's employment with the state.
Okay. Is that your understanding of your complete plea agreement with the state?
That's it.
Okay. Were you sentenced as guilty to anything, or did you receive a sentence after your guilty plea yet?
No, sir, not yet.
Okay. Can you explain that to the jury?
The plea is Part A and the sentence is Part B. Part B hasn't happened yet because we're waiting for all this other stuff to get wrapped up.
Okay. And as a result of your guilty plea, were you promised by the state of North Carolina anything as to your sentence?
Nothing at all.
Okay. Have you had any discussions with my office about what your sentence will be?
No.
Other than the things that we've listed there, that you'll cooperate and that your wife won't be charged and that you will plead guilty to that and nothing else as a result of this, have you received any benefit from us for your testimony today?
Absolutely not.
Has anything in your testimony today, well, let me rephrase that. Have you been honest with the jury about what your involvement in all of this was?
Yes, I have.
Have you been honest with the jury about what you remember the defendant's involvement in any of this being?
I have.
Has anyone in our office ever asked you to do anything or say anything about this case that was, or to tell the jury anything that's been untruthful about all of this?
I've never had any kind of meeting with anybody in your office other than the one with Agent Whitley and the 10 minutes you and I had yesterday and this morning.
Okay.
So no.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Bradsher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Blitzer, let's start with the plea deal. You just answered the prosecutor that the state has not promised you anything else except for what is in that plea transcript.
Yes, sir.
That's not completely accurate, is it?
It is accurate.
Wasn't it true that after this plea deal and after you went and did a new affidavit for the civil case, that your attorney went with Lauren Freeman, the elected DA here, to meet with Judge Stevens in chambers to discuss the terms of your sentencing?
If they did, that's news to me.
And isn't it true that the state made a concession to you even before you entered the plea that they would not oppose a PJC?
That is not true.
And isn't it true that after they met with Judge Stevens, that was actually memorialized in a document that the state would not oppose a PJC?
I've seen a document that Judge Stevens wrote. I haven't seen any document where the state takes a position on Judge Stevens' memo. And as you and I both know, if it's not in here, it's not part of my plea deal. And I'll reiterate again, if my counsel had a meeting with Judge Stevens and Lauren Freeman, I didn't know about it. and I certainly was not there.
Right? So I'm going to follow up with that. I ask you this question. It is your understanding as former defense attorney and district attorney that every term of a plea agreement is supposed to be memorialized in the plea transcript. Isn't that right?
Say again, I'm sorry?
Every term in the plea agreement is supposed to be memorialized in that plea agreement. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And so it's your position here under oath that you've never been communicated to, that your attorneys have asked for and the state has agreed not to oppose a PJC.
I have never been told that the state's position in writing is going to be they don't oppose a PJC.
All right? Next question. When would you say that you first met with the civil lawyers?
Very early June of last year.
When did you first retain counsel in this matter?
Formally, or when did I first contact
When
Mike?
did you first contact him?
First spoke to Mike probably June of 16.
All right, so Mike Grace is your attorney on that matter, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so in June of 2016, you would have talked to him. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And before that, timeline-wise, you would have traveled with me in the car to Ocracoke in March of 2016. Is that right?
April. Yes, sir.
Okay, April, correct. And the meeting where I came and got the Shockley file was in March of 2016. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And isn't it true you told the jury yesterday that you first heard of a SBI investigation in December of 2015? Is
Correct.
that right? Okay. And in December of 2015, what you heard was that the SBI was looking into whether Pam and Cindy were reporting to work. Is that right?
Essentially, yes.
But when you heard that, you knew that Pam no longer worked for you because she left in August. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So what was the name of the person that gave you that information?
Who told me?
Yes.
Jim Kendrick.
All right. You've also said under oath that there was no shared employee arrangement between my district and your district. Is that right?
I think what I said was that Tyler Henderson did no work for Rockingham County.
All right. Well, let me follow up with what the state asked you about a talent sharing arrangement between your district and my district with regards to Tyler Henderson. You remember him asking you that?
I do.
All right. And your response yesterday was there was no such talent sharing arrangement. Isn't that right?
None that I was aware of.
All right. Do you know then why? Well, let me withdraw that and start with this. Who is Melinda Richardson?
She was my administrative assistant.
All right. And in a district attorney's office, the administrative assistant is kind of the top admin person
Sure.
for the elected DA. Is that true?
Sure.
All right. Do you know if you ever said to her that Tyler Henderson was part of a shared employee program?
I have no idea. I don't recall making that statement.
All right. You do know she was interviewed by the SBI. Isn't that right?
If you say so.
Okay. And Jason Ramey, you know, has been interviewed by the SBI. Is that right? Do you know why they would be saying that?
Objection.
Sustained. That's just speculating as to someone's motive.
Oh, okay. Well, do you know why Cindy would say
Objection.
Well, go ahead and ask your question.
that she didn't have any work to do?
All right. Sustain it as to speculating on someone's motive.
All right. It was your understanding from your observations that Cindy didn't have work to do. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was it your understanding from your observations with Melinda Richardson that there was no shared employee program?
It was my understanding as the elected DA that there was no employee sharing program other than who was employed where for the purposes of beacon entry.
So you did not say talent sharing or shared employee to Melinda Richardson or any other of your employees?
I can't see myself ever using the word talent sharing, to be honest with you, and I have, and even if I did say it, under what context are you saying that I said that?
All right, I'll come back to that. So when you go to Mike Grace in June of 2016, what is your purpose?
Just to ask him if he had heard anything. You know, he has ears in Raleigh, I guess. He and I were friends professionally for quite some time.
All right, and I'm not asking you to violate attorney-client privilege. I want to ask you a general question. Did you go to Mike Grace with regards to these issues that you told the jury about?
Well, when I saw him in June, these issues weren't the issues.
Okay. Was it related to employment of Cindy Blitzer or Tyler Henderson?
It was related to what, in very general terms, what did he think we could do as elected DAs with our support staff's time?
All right. And as an elected DA, now having sought legal counsel in June of 2016, when you came back home and started the work week, did you see Cindy doing any work?
In June of 16?
Yes.
That was, no, because you had taken the Shockley case March of 16.
And is it true that it's your position that based on the conversation in the driveway, in the car, on the Ocracoke trip, that from that point on, you did not communicate with me about whether or not Cindy was working? Is that right?
Not that I recall, no, sir.
Then after you talk with Mike Grace and get independent legal advice, did you make any communication with me to indicate that Cindy was not working?
Cindy didn't work for me, no.
Okay. And in July, do you recall making any communication with me about Cindy not working?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you call anybody in my office?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And in August of 2016, do you recall calling me at all to indicate Cindy was not working?
No, I don't.
Okay. So that gets us to September. From your testimony, do you believe that you spoke with me in September?
We may have.
Okay. Do you recall any conversation with me in September?
Of 16 or 17?
We're still in 16, following from the June 16 meeting with Mike Grace.
I don't recall any conversation.
All right. So then the first conversation you recall is this October phone call where you and Cindy are on the line?
Yes.
Okay. And during that call, as you were answering Mr. Latour's question, you indicated that I said we weren't doing anything wrong, I'd take it to 12, don't resign. Is that right?
Correct.
And let's go with that. Based on your recollection, you said that I said that. And could you tell the jury what you and Cindy's response was when this elected DA said, there's an FBI investigation, she's not working, you know she's not working, and don't resign, I'm just going to take it to a jury trial, and your response was what?
My response to Cindy?
No, to me on the phone when I say this.
We did what we did for the last 18 months, followed what you said as the way it was to be, because we believed that you knew what you were doing, having served the full 4-year term before.
So would you agree at least that you said okay, or you said nothing, or what?
Are you asking me exactly what I said when I hung up?
Well, you were on the other extension, is that right?
Yes.
Isn't it true, Mr. Blitzer, that when you and Cindy called me, that y'all had a plan, didn't you?
No.
And isn't it true that when Cindy was on the phone with me, she didn't disclose anybody else was on the line, did she?
I spoke to you before you started speaking with Cindy.
And when she offered to resign, isn't it true that I actually said, no, you should continue to keep working your 40 hours a week and keep good records of what you're doing? Isn't that true?
No. And if I had a plan, rest assured I would have recorded the conversation if I had a plan.
All right. And that was in October. Is that right? Maybe first or second week in October. Do you know?
I believe it was more towards early October because I believe she was terminated by Gail P. I think October 24th.
So it's your position here under oath that on one conversation in the early October, I say, don't do anything, just going to take it to 12, everything's fine. And then a couple weeks later, I terminate her?
That's exactly right.
You remember another phone call where I attempted to call Cindy and she would not return the call, and then you and I spoke?
Well, I don't know if you called Cindy or not.
Do you recall telling me that Cindy had an attorney and that I couldn't speak with her?
I may have.
Okay. You were answered some questions from Mr. Latour about your understanding and observations. So let me ask you this. Were you present when Cindy went to Melinda Richardson in October of 2016 and attempted to get her to enter her beacon hours?
I doubt it. Why would I be I don't.
Well, without saying what Cindy said, you've answered the state's question as saying she didn't have any work to do. So I'm asking you, from your observations and understanding, did you know Cindy actually told Melinda that she was working?
Objection.
Sustained.
Melinda Richardson was your AA, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So in October of 2016, did you ever communicate with Melinda Richardson
About what?
about beacon hours?
No.
All right. Did you communicate with her about anything?
About someone's beacon hours?
Yes.
I didn't. I was not the supervisor for beacon hours for my office.
All right.
That was Melinda's job.
I know I started us off with June of 2016, but let me back up to the beginning when the first transfer occurred. You would agree that was approved by AOC, is that right?
Absolutely.
So do you know from your observations how Cindy would put in her beacon hours through the AOC system?
I never observed anybody put in beacon hours. They do it through the computer.
So you never observed Cindy from the time she transferred all the way to the time that she was let go put in any beacon hours?
I've seen people at the computer, whether they were putting in beacon time, I don't know. I couldn't tell you if I saw Melinda put in beacon time. Did I know she was putting in beacon time? It wasn't relevant to me.
Did you ever ask Melinda Richardson to put in beacon time for Cindy?
I may have.
Okay. Well, if you may have, can you nail it down to a time frame of when you told her to put in Cindy's beacon hours?
I have no idea. It would have been a point in time, I'm guessing, in the beginning, before, either very shortly before the transfer, when Cindy was still working for 17A, or, I mean, if you want me to guess, I'll guess.
So do you recall asking Melinda Richardson to put in Cindy Blitzer, your wife's beacon time, after the transfer?
I may have.
All right. And why would you direct your AA to put in beacon hours for your wife, who you have said you've taken the hands off because she's no longer your employee?
Well, my understanding about beacon was it would have to have been approved by someone supervising Cindy at your office, but what terminal it got put in at was not the question. And obviously, at my residence, there's no state intranet terminal to put it in.
All right, so that's why you would have told Melinda Richardson to put in your wife's beacon hours.
That would be my guess, yes.
Let's talk about that supervision issue you just brought up. You were the elected DA for the district, isn't that right?
Yes?
You had an AA that had been in the previous administration, is that
Yes.
right? So with regards to how Beacon worked with each employee entering their hours, did you know how that system worked?
I found out bits and pieces after this, but in the beginning, before this, I just knew that Beacon was the state's hourly system.
All right, well, until you resigned, during that time, did you ever know how it worked?
Till I resigned, not completely. I mean, it didn't apply to the lawyers. It didn't apply to the electeds. I knew that the system wouldn't let you put in time, even if you legitimately worked it outside of Monday, 8 to 5. But that's about it.
Glad you said that. In fact, let's talk about that. Isn't it true that in March, when I came and got the Shockley file, that you expressed concern that Cindy wasn't able to put in her hours accurately because the Beacon system wouldn't allow to put it in on weekends and nights? So she was putting her total hours in as a Monday through Friday situation. Remember saying
Sure.
that? Okay. And that is when you were told, isn't it true, that she should document her hours specifically, not just Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but record what she was actually working. Isn't that true?
Well, no, I think I recall the conversation being that's when she should vary them, which I took to mean that you meant start accruing some of the 40 hours using other sources of time, vacation time, comp time, sick time, other management approved leave time. But no independent, I don't recall us having a conversation about keeping independent records.
Well, if you would, tell the jury, how many times do you think since the transfer you said to me that you believed that I had the authority to pay Cindy to go to nursing school? How many times would you say you told me that?
How many times did I say you had the
Yes.
authority? I don't think I said that to you ever.
Isn't it true that you, in fact, in the March meeting, again said, I think you have the authority to pay Cindy to go to nursing school? And that I responded, I may have, but I'm not. She needs to record the hours she's working. Isn't that true?
Objection.
Sustained as to what you said.
Okay. So let's talk about Mr. Keeney and Mr. Ramey. Mr. Keeney has been in the office how long?
Which office?
The DA's office in Rockingham County.
He started with me January 1 of 15. I don't know. I understand he's since left.
All right. Did you know Mr. Keeney before you became DA?
Just through coming to the courthouse.
Had he worked in the previous administration?
He had been an assistant a couple times before that, yes.
And so what was his role in the Rockingham County office?
With me,
Yes.
he was the chief assistant.
All right. So like your number 2 guy.
Sure.
Okay. Somebody you would talk to, confide in as a part of doing your job as DA. Isn't that right?
Sure.
And isn't it true that you had conversations with him about this, didn't you?
About the investigation?
And about everything that you talked with the jury here today. Isn't that right?
I'm sure I had.
And isn't it true that when you talked to Mr. Keeney during the course of this transfer, that he told you,
Sustained as to what someone else said.
all right, do you recall telling Mr. Keeney about Cindy Blitzer working under this transfer arrangement?
I'm sure we discussed the transfer because Pam was coming on board.
Do you recall talking to him in February of 2016 about an SBI investigation?
I spoke to him in December of 15 about it.
And isn't it true that you talked to his father
Yes,
about it, who is also an attorney?
in Connecticut, yes.
All right. How about Jason Ramey? Did you talk with him about this arrangement?
The transfer?
About the Cindy Blitzer transfer?
I don't think I spoke to Jason Ramey about Pam and Cindy switching in January of 15. I may have, but only to say this is the new employee.
All right. When the SBI came to you in the fall of 2016, do you remember that date?
The SBI didn't come to me in the fall of 16.
All right. No SBI agent contacted you or your office?
Other than Agent Whitley, whom I've never spoke to till May of 16.
So
I'm sorry, May of 17.
the contact SBI made with the Rockingham County DA's office in the fall of 2016,
Did not involve me.
you don't recall sending word that you had counsel and you were not going to be spoken to?
Yeah, that was with David Whitley, but not my office.
All right, let me rephrase it then. When, in the fall of 2016, do you say you were approached by the SBI?
I got a voicemail from Agent Whitley sometime in August of 16. We exchanged voicemails. I'm in a BLET class. You can reach me real early. And then once I realized that it was Agent Whitley and spoke to Tyler Henderson and put two and two together, I no longer responded to Agent Whitley's calls. Mr. Grace reached out to him.
All right? So you directed Agent Whitley to Mike Grace?
No, I probably directed more of Mike Grace to Agent Whitley, but sure.
Okay. And so from August 16th until May of 2017, you declined to give any statement or interview to the SBI, is that right?
You could say that.
Okay. And during that entire time, you also had the guidance and advice of legal counsel, is that right?
I think Mr. Grace was really more looking out for Cindy's interests at that point because of everything that was being written and released by the SBI, as I stated earlier, did not name neither me or you as people of interest. It was looking at Jay Stoltz and Cindy.
All right. So you said that on direct that you did not think you were a person of interest. So in your mind, in the fall of 2016, you had done nothing wrong and you weren't a subject to be looked at, right?
Yes.
And you did not know that your office was giving statements about
Oh, no, I knew they were giving statements.
about the online classes and all these other things?
Sure, I knew that.
And in the fall of 2016, you didn't consider yourself a suspect in getting staff during the day to take online courses for your wife?
Well, they didn't take the complete class online, number one. And number two, based on everything I was reading from the SBI in the paper and from the judge, it only named Cindy and Jay Stoltz. So, no, I didn't think I was a person of interest at that point.
So just to clear it up, did you have Grace as your lawyer?
I guess you could say he was looking out for me and Cindy both.
At some point that switched and there was another lawyer involved, isn't that right?
Of course.
And who was the other lawyer?
Joe Zazatarsky,
And who did Joe Zazatarsky represent?
Cindy.
And when did he come into play?
I think April maybe, April of 17, give or take.
All right. So the communications with me, October early October, during the resignation, and during the conversations you've described where you said I talked about Ms. Holbrook, through Lauren Freeman taking over the investigation, you had counsel, is that right? And Mr. Grace was counsel for both you and Cindy.
What's your question? What dates?
From September of 2016 through May of 2017.
We were talking with Mr. Grace on a regular basis. I don't recall specifically Cindy's interaction with Mr. Zezatarsky, and I did not formally hire Mr. Grace until, I think, late March of 17.
So since you had talked to Mr. Grace even before the SBI approached you back in June, and talked about this issue, did you go home and tell Cindy, hey, you're doing nothing wrong by entering your hours into Beacon and not working?
I'm sure I did.
So you and Cindy operated on the belief, after meeting with your lawyer in June, that entering the Beacon hours without doing any work was okay.
Based on representations from you, not from Mr. Grace.
Oh, well, you did seek legal counsel for Mr. Grace, though, didn't you, in June of 2016?
I spoke to Mr. Grace.
And you've told the jury you talked to him about this issue, didn't you?
Yes.
So you left that meeting with your attorney believing that Cindy could not work and enter her hours in Beacon, and it was not violating any law. Is that right?
No, I don't think I said that.
Well, I asked you, did you go home and tell Cindy after the meeting with Mr. Grace, hey, talk to a lawyer, it's okay, keep not working and entering in your Beacon hours?
That's not the conversation I had with Mr. Grace, nor is it the conversation I had with Cindy.
So why did you go see Mr. Grace?
Because of the investigation being conducted, and was it appropriate? Did he think you had the authority to pay Cindy not to work, to go to school? Did he think it was appropriate? Did he believe you had the authority as the hiring authority? As you stated, did he think it was an issue for an election? Well, you may not like it, but that's my authority.
And isn't it true you left that meeting with Mr. Grace with legal advice that it was not okay?
Sustained.
Let me ask you, I'll ask it this way. After the meeting with Mr. Grace, did you go home and tell Cindy that based on your meeting, that entering Beacon hours for hours you didn't work was okay?
Objection.
Overrule. Well, sustained is based on your meeting.
I'll rephrase it one more time.
He's not waiving attorney-client privilege.
Yes,
but,
sir.
I
I
think,
understand.
other than that, I think your question is fine.
Thank you. After the meeting with Mr. Grace, did you go home and tell Cindy that, hey, Cindy, it is not illegal for you to enter in Beacon hours for hours you didn't work?
Not in those words, no. And I didn't have I had a lunch meeting with Mr. Grace, not a let's open up law books type meeting. So you'll have to ask Mr. Grace what he based what he told me on.
Well, let me just ask,
But there was just as much clout in what Mr. Grace told me as there was what you said and had been saying.
so as of this meeting, not based on, but after that meeting with Mr. Grace, tell the jury, what did you tell Cindy?
I don't remember exactly what I told Cindy, but clearly nothing changed. So I'm sure I told something along the lines that it's okay. I mean, I know Mr. Grace is not the law or the prosecutor. She knew that. So
You told her it was okay?
I don't know if I told her those exact words. There didn't seem to be any concern on our side with what Mr. Grace believed and what we were being told by you.
So just to wrap that section up, you believe you went home and told Cindy it was okay for her to keep doing what she was doing?
Essentially, yes.
So when did that change?
That it wasn't okay?
When did you start telling her it's not okay?
Well, I don't know if I ever told her it's not okay, per se. Obviously, we knew it was a problem when the matter was ultimately referred to the AG's office.
But until that point, y'all both felt like y'all had not done anything wrong, right?
Well,
Objection to what she felt.
You're right. I'll withdraw that, Your Honor. Let me try again.
Go ahead.
As of that time, you didn't think you had done anything wrong. Is that right?
no.
And based on your observations of Cindy, you didn't believe she had done anything wrong. Is that right?
Based on my observations of Cindy and my reliance on what you were telling me.
What I told you in that, what? What are you referring to? Let's hear that quote again, what I
March
said.
meeting
Okay?
where you talked about the ethics opinion and we're the hiring authority and the ethics opinion gives us unfettered discretion. The October phone call, not March, I'm sorry.
So, for the jury's sake, are you saying this is the first time that I ever said this to you, that based on the ethics opinion that district attorneys had complete authority to have a employee not work and enter beacon hours in?
In October?
Is that the first time that you say that you heard me say that?
It may have come up on some similar context in March because I know the ethics opinion was back then, and that was when I first mentioned the investigation to you.
Well, Mr. Blitzer, isn't it true that the ethics opinion came back in 2015
Yeah,
in May? Is that right?
I'm sure it did, yes.
And a letter of guidance in June, isn't that right?
Okay.
You don't recall speaking to me about the results of the Ethics Commission and the steps that were going to be taken to try and comply with what the law said?
We didn't discuss the ethics opinion letter until the investigation surfaced, and it all became relevant because that's what you were hanging your hat on, was what they said in there, that unfettered discretion.
Let me try to refresh your memory and back up a little bit. April 24th, 2017. Do you recall a work order to set up an office for Cindy in the Rockingham County's DA's office, starting this idea of the shared employee where they were working in the Rockingham and Caswell and Person office?
April 24th of 17?
I'm sorry, April 24th of 2015,
A work,
after the transfer had occurred.
a work order in Rockingham County?
On direct yesterday, you did allude to the fact that Cindy had an office in the Rockingham office even after the transfer, right?
Yeah.
And it was her responsibility to handle the conflict cases, the special projects that we'll talk about in a minute, and overflow work for Rockingham office. Isn't that right?
My understanding was she was doing the conflict cases that Rockingham County had that Caswell Person picked up,
And that was it.
and Shockley being the bulk of that.
And Jay Stoltz was her assigned supervisor from my district. Is that right?
At some point, you were, I thought, and then you switched with him, but yeah.
All right, so let me ask you this generally. Isn't it true that Jay Stoltz was the originally assigned supervisor from Cindy
He
from
may have
the
been.
outset of the transfer?
It may have been. It was your office. Not mine. I mean, you would have assigned the supervisor.
Well, you had enough interaction with Cindy to know that she wasn't doing any work, but you didn't have any idea who her supervisor was, right?
When the transfer occurred, she was working. You hadn't, the Shockley case was there.
And Jay Stoltz was the supervisor, wasn't he?
Okay.
Don't you recall testifying yesterday that at the March meeting, one of the things that you said was that I indicated to you that Jay Stoltz was going to be your
That's
supervisor?
March of 16. The transfer was in 15.
Right.
You're a year back.
Well, from the beginning of the transfer, isn't it true that Jay Stoltz was a supervisor?
I don't think that's right.
You don't know, okay? And as of March of 2016, you at least concede that I told you Jay Stoltz was the supervisor. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So after leaving in the March meeting and telling you Jay Stoltz was the supervisor and that as DA I had full authority, I tell you in April, oh, she doesn't have to work. She can just do her schoolwork.
Well, I didn't say you said that.
Okay. But you did say that after that conversation, she stopped working.
What I said was, after that conversation, you said for her to concentrate on her schooling, that you would get back with her.
Okay? So, up until the March meeting, do you say to this jury, Cindy was working the hours that she was putting in Beacon based on your observation and knowledge?
Yes.
And after the March meeting, you were not aware of any work she did. Is that right? And after the June meeting with Attorney Grace, you thought that was okay?
Essentially, yeah.
I'm going to get stopping for you, all right?
All right, we'll take a break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute recess and resume at 11:15. Please recall all the instructions that I've given you. Don't talk about this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Please don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation in these matters. No conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Please leave your notepads in your chairs. Gather in the deliberation room at 15:15. Everyone else, please remain seated while the jurors excuse themselves. Excuse me. Outside the presence of the jury, is there anything that we need to take up before we recess?
No, Your Honor.
All right, very good. Counsel, if you'll approach just for a moment off the record.